As Annie was heading home from work, she suddenly spotted a woman in a red dress standing in the underground parking garage. The woman stood there, her eyes fixed intently on Annie. Initially, Annie assumed it was some kind of prank and didn't pay much attention, planning to continue on her way. However, the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt, a sense of inexplicable disquiet growing in her heart. When she looked back again, the woman was still standing there, her eyes locked on Annie. Despite her confusion, Annie couldn't muster the courage to go and investigate. She could only hurriedly leave the garage and quickly return to her apartment. As soon as she entered the building, Annie suddenly felt a chill down her spine, as if something was quietly approaching. Fear rapidly spread through her, and glancing back once more, she saw that the red-dressed woman had already caught up to her. Completely stunned, Annie rushed to her apartment door and locked it. However, the fear did not subside even after entering her room. Instead, it intensified. Curiosity compelled her to investigate. Upon waking up, Annie seemed to remember something. She opened her photo album and finally discovered a shocking detail in a graduation photo. One of her female classmates bore an uncanny resemblance to the red-dressed woman. But what Annie found even more incomprehensible was that this classmate had passed away in an accident long ago. The next morning, as Annie prepared to drive to work, she once again saw the red-dressed woman still standing in the parking garage. This time Annie felt a bit angry, thinking she must teach that woman a lesson. Suddenly, a car passed by, and the red-dressed woman vanished into thin air in an instant. Annie was immediately filled with a sense of bewilderment. At the company, Annie told her colleagues about the events of the past few days, but they simply thought she was overworked and hallucinating, advising her to get some rest early. Annie didn't say much more, but a lingering unease persisted in her heart. That evening after work, she didn't see the woman again. But as she took the elevator upstairs, the doors suddenly opened, and the red-dressed woman appeared at the entrance, her face covered in blood, nearly suffocating Annie with fright. She hurriedly pressed the close button, but no matter which floor the elevator stopped at, that woman would appear at the entrance. Finally, the elevator reached the 8th floor, and Annie despairingly realized she still couldn't escape. As the ghost slowly approached the elevator, Annie instinctively pushed her away and raced towards her apartment door. But no matter how she turned the key, the lock wouldn't open. At that moment, the red-dressed woman instantly appeared before her. In a panic, Annie had no choice but to flee desperately towards the stairwell, but the woman appeared in front of her again. Annie desperately sought a chance to escape, finally running to a corner outside the building to hide, hurriedly taking out her phone to call the police. But the next second,